He was not barking for help, and that was what made the call feel wrong from the beginning. The voice on the phone had been low, hurried, and swallowed by rain. 5 words only before the line went dead. Check the white dog first. By the time Staff Sergeant Caleb Brooks reached the private K-9 rescue property outside Jacksonville, North Carolina, the storm had turned the gravel road into a brown ribbon of water, and the old sign at the entrance swung loose on one rusted chain. Caleb sat for 1 second behind the wheel of his government pickup, headlights cutting through the gray sheets of rain, and studied the place the way Marines study silence. The fence line sagged near the far corner. The office light was off. No trucks sat in the lot. No caretaker waved from the porch. Yet somewhere beyond the dark rows of kennels came a soft metallic sound, steady and strange, like a tag tapping against a bowl. Caleb stepped out into ankle-deep water, the rain striking the brim of his cover and running down the collar of his jacket. He was 38, a black United States Marine with broad shoulders, close-cropped hair, and eyes that missed very little. He had spent enough years around military working dogs to know the difference between fear and discipline, between panic and purpose. This place had neither noise nor order. It had only water, wind, and the sharp smell of wet concrete mixed with disinfectant. "Hello," he called, his voice carrying across the flooded yard. No answer came. A plastic feed bucket drifted past his boot. Somewhere a loose gate clicked in the wind. Caleb moved forward with a flashlight in one hand and a bolt cutter in the other, not because he wanted trouble, but because the front chain was locked and the water was still rising. The first kennel row was empty. So was the second. Bowls floated inside open runs. Blankets clung to chain-link walls, heavy and soaked. At the third row, his flashlight caught something pale in the darkness. Not a tarp. Not a bag. Fur. A white German Shepherd stood in the last kennel on the left, chest deep in cold floodwater, balanced with his front paws braced against the metal door and his hind legs trembling beneath him. His coat, once bright as snow, was streaked with mud. His ears were upright but tired. His amber eyes fixed on Caleb with a look so controlled it felt almost human. But what Caleb noticed first was the dog's mouth. He was holding a rusted dog tag between his teeth, keeping it above the water as if it mattered more than his own breath. Caleb stopped moving. The rain seemed to pull back for one quiet second. "Easy, boy," he said, softer now. "I see you." The dog did not drop the tag. He did not lunge, bark, or retreat. He only held still, water shifting around his shoulders, his whole body shaking from effort. Caleb stepped closer, shining the light down at the kennel latch. It was locked from the outside with a fresh padlock, the metal cleaner than everything around it. That detail settled in him like a stone. Floods make messes. People make choices. "Who left you here?" Caleb whispered. The dog blinked once, slow and exhausted, but kept his grip on the tag. Caleb positioned the bolt cutter, jaw against steel, and squeezed until the lock snapped open and fell into the water with a dull splash. The German Shepherd did not push out immediately. He waited, watching Caleb's hands, his posture, his breathing. Trained. Careful. Wounded in trust more than body. Caleb opened the gate just wide enough and backed away to give him space. "Come on. You can come out." The dog tried. His front paws slipped on the wet concrete, and his body dipped, but he lifted his head higher, keeping the tag dry. Caleb moved without thinking, stepping into the kennel water, sliding one arm beneath the dog's chest and the other around his ribs. The shepherd was lighter than he should have been, all soaked fur and exhausted muscle. Still, he resisted just enough to keep his mouth angled upward. "All right," Caleb murmured, voice steady against the storm. "I have got you. I have got that too." He eased the dog into his arms and carried him out through the flooded row, feeling the animal tremble against him, feeling the tag tap faintly against his glove. Beneath the roof overhang, Caleb set him on a dry pallet and wrapped him in the emergency blanket from his pack. Only then did the dog lower his head and place the tag gently into Caleb's open palm. Not drop it. Place it. Caleb looked down. Rainwater ran over the old metal, washing mud from the stamped letters little by little. The first name was nearly worn away. The last name remained clear enough to read, Whitaker. Caleb's breath caught. He knew that name. Years earlier, a Marine handler with that same last name had filed a complaint about missing K-9 transfer records, then disappeared from the paperwork as if the system had simply swallowed him. Caleb looked back at the white shepherd, whose amber eyes had not left his face. The dog was not asking to be saved anymore. He had already done that part. He was asking Caleb to understand why he had been left behind. Caleb lifted the soaked white German shepherd from the flooded kennel and carried him toward the back of the property, where a small covered area provided the first shelter from the downpour. The rain ran down his jacket in rivulets, soaking his gloves and hair, but he paid no attention, his focus fixed entirely on the dog whose amber eyes followed every movement. The dog, named Valor, was trembling from the cold and exhaustion, but he did not protest the hold, only rested his head against Caleb's chest with quiet trust. Each step through the ankle-deep water sent splashes across mud-slicked boards and broken planks, the smell of wet wood and disinfectant hanging in the air. Caleb set him down gently under the small overhang and pulled an emergency blanket from his pack, wrapping it carefully around the dog's shoulders and body. Valor's eyes brightened slightly as the warmth touched him, but his attention remained fixed on the direction of the other kennels, as though something unseen still demanded observation. Caleb knelt beside him, running his gloved hand along the dog's back, feeling the tense muscles slowly relax, the dog exhaling in relief that made the air feel warmer. He noticed again the rusted dog tag in Valor's mouth, which the dog held with purpose, keeping it dry above the puddles of water that covered the ground. Caleb pried it gently from his mouth and examined it, seeing the worn letters of a Marine's name, a detail that made the hairs on his arms rise in recognition and unease. He could feel the significance of what the dog had protected, the hint of a story layered beneath the flood and neglect. Caleb scanned the remaining kennels, now partially submerged, noting broken water bowls, blankets floating in the water, and the empty, silent cages that once held other dogs. The property felt abandoned, but the echo of someone's hurried departure lingered in the smell of damp wood and the faint traces of human presence. Caleb reached into his coat pocket and pulled a flashlight, sweeping its beam across the rear of the kennels. The light caught a partially submerged crate with a small stack of wet, sealed envelopes. He approached slowly, lifting the top envelope carefully and brushing off the water, seeing it was marked with dates and notations that suggested records of dogs who were moved, missing, or unaccounted for. Valor shifted, placing a paw on Caleb's knee, nudging him toward the crate as if confirming its importance. Caleb followed the indication, kneeling in the wet grass, and carefully opened the sealed paperwork, finding lists of names, dates, and collar numbers that suggested the kennel had been hiding more than neglect. An organized record of dogs mismanaged or removed improperly. Caleb's mind raced, connecting the dots between the flooded kennels, the lone surviving dog, and the significance of the dog tag, still held tightly in Valor's jaw. He realized that the dog had not wandered aimlessly. Valor had been left behind intentionally and had survived to deliver the proof. As Caleb gathered the envelopes and dog tag, he spoke softly to Valor, praising him with quiet words. "You kept it safe. You found me." The dog responded with a gentle thump of his tail against the soaked wood, the first sign of relief since Caleb had arrived. The storm outside continued its steady rhythm, but under the shelter, the moment felt contained, a bubble of warmth and safety. Caleb placed the paperwork into his dry pack and wrapped the dog tighter in the blanket, letting Valor rest for a few seconds before moving toward his truck. Each step he took through the wet grass was careful, the dog secure in his arms, the envelopes safe from further damage, as though the mission had shifted from survival to revelation. Caleb's thoughts circled around what he had discovered. The neglected kennel and hidden records hinted at a betrayal and oversight that extended beyond the flooded property. And Valor's survival had provided the first tangible clue to a larger story that needed to be understood, investigated, and corrected. As they reached the truck, Caleb paused, looking back at the silent kennels, reflecting on the dog's courage and the quiet persistence that had led him to this point. Valor lifted his head slightly, amber eyes meeting Caleb's, full of trust and purpose, and Caleb felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that the next steps would uncover truths hidden in neglect. That this dog had brought him to evidence of something far more significant than a single rescue, and that every careful movement, every wet paw print, and every trembling step in the water had been a part of the mission that Valor had completed with unwavering loyalty. Caleb did not start the truck right away. He sat in the driver's seat with the door open, rain ticking against the metal frame, one hand resting on Valor's blanket and the other holding the rusted dog tag beneath the pale glow of the dome light. The name Whitaker stared back at him through scratches and age, simple letters pressed into metal, but behind those letters was a door Caleb had not expected to open again. Years earlier, during a joint training cycle near Camp Lejeune, he had heard the name Staff Sergeant Aaron Whitaker spoken with respect by every handler who knew working dogs. Whitaker was quiet, exact, and patient, the kind of Marine who believed a dog's trust was not equipment, not property, but a bond that had to be earned every morning. Then his records had become strange. A transfer notice with no receiving unit. A K-9 reassignment form with missing signatures. A few unanswered questions buried under routine paperwork. Caleb had never been close enough to the case to challenge it, only close enough to remember that something about it had never sat right. Now, in the back seat of his truck, a white German Shepherd lay wrapped in silver emergency foil, breathing in shallow but steady pulls, and the tag that should have been filed away years ago had come back in the mouth of a dog left in rising water. Caleb closed his fingers around the tag. "You knew him," he said softly. Valor's ears lifted beneath the blanket. Not all the way. Just enough. The dog's eyes opened and settled on Caleb, tired but clear, and then shifted toward the far end of the property where a squat office building stood half hidden behind rain-blurred windows and leaning pine branches. Caleb followed that look. The office door was closed. The blinds were drawn. A faded decal on the glass read Coastal Haven K-9 Recovery, the kind of name designed to make people feel safe before they asked too many questions. Caleb reached for the radio clipped to his vest. "This is Staff Sergeant Brooks. I have one rescued K-9, alive but exhausted. I also have documents and a military identification tag connected to an old handler record. I am requesting animal medical support, base legal notification, and local animal control. I am going to secure the office and wait for backup." Static answered first, then the calm voice of Lieutenant Harris from the duty desk. "Copy, Staff Sergeant. Weather is slowing movement. Estimated support arrival 20 minutes. Do not enter a compromised structure unless there is immediate need." Caleb looked at Valor again. The dog had lifted his head higher now, staring at the office with a stillness that felt less like interest and more like memory. Caleb knew that look from patrol dogs, from dogs who had found a scent and would not abandon it because people were uncomfortable with what it meant. "There may be immediate need," Caleb said. He stepped out of the truck, closed the door gently to keep warmth around Valor, and moved through the flooded yard toward the office. The water here was shallower, sliding around his boots in cold ripples. A torn clipboard floated near the steps. A strip of yellow caution tape clung to the railing, not from any official closure, just the thin store-bought kind people use when they want a place to look off limits without inviting inspection. Caleb climbed the 2 steps and tried the door. Locked. Fresh lock again. Same clean metal. Same wrong feeling. He swept his flashlight along the frame and saw mud smudges at knee height, paw marks dried under the overhang, and one long white hair caught in a splinter near the threshold. Valor had been here before the kennel. Maybe often. Caleb looked back toward the truck. Through the rain-streaked window, the dog was standing on the seat now, blanket slipping from his shoulders, eyes fixed on him. "All right," Caleb murmured. "I hear you." He used the bolt cutter once more, the sound sharp in the rain, then eased the office door open. The smell hit him first: wet paper, mildew, stale coffee, and the clean sting of antiseptic covering something older and sadder. He stepped inside slowly, keeping the flashlight beam low. The room was small, with a reception desk, 2 filing cabinets, a corkboard, and a row of collars hanging on pegs along the back wall. Not decorative collars. Working collars. Some had numbers written on tape. Some had faded names. One peg was empty, dust outlined around the space where something had recently been removed. Caleb moved closer. On the corkboard were photographs of dogs lined up with volunteers, smiling donors, ribbon-cutting events, and adoption days. At first glance it looked harmless, even kind. But beneath the photographs, half hidden by a calendar, was a printed schedule with strange marks beside certain dogs' names. Valor was there. White male German Shepherd. Not suitable. Hold until storm clearance. Caleb felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his breathing even. Anger could come later. Right now, the truth needed careful hands. He photographed the board, the collars, the records on the desk, then opened the first filing cabinet. Most folders were ordinary medical summaries, food logs, adoption forms. The second drawer was locked. He paused, listening to the rain on the roof, the distant hum of his truck engine, the quiet call of duty moving beneath it all. When the drawer opened, it did not reveal one secret. It revealed a pattern. Transfer forms with no destination address. Health reports marked incomplete. Donation receipts tied to dogs who were listed as unavailable the same week. Caleb lifted each page gently, placing them into waterproof evidence sleeves from his pack. Then he found the folder marked W. Inside was a photograph of Staff Sergeant Aaron Whitaker kneeling beside a younger white German Shepherd, one hand resting on the dog's shoulder, both of them looking toward the camera with the same calm focus. Beneath it was a handwritten note, the ink faded but readable. If Valor is ever separated from my file, someone is hiding him. Caleb stood very still. Outside, Valor let out one low sound from the truck, not a bark, not a cry, but a long breath pressed into voice. Caleb looked at the photograph, then toward the rain, then back at the note. The dog had not only survived the flood. He had protected the last thread tying a forgotten truth to the light. Caleb read the handwritten note 3 times, not because the words were unclear, but because they carried the weight of a man who knew he might not be believed. If Valor is ever separated from my file, someone is hiding him. The rain softened against the office roof, falling now in a steady hush instead of a roar, and the whole room seemed to lean toward the truth in Caleb's hand. He set the photograph and note inside a waterproof sleeve, then moved carefully through the remaining files, photographing each page before touching it, preserving the order, letting procedure become a form of respect. There were names of dogs, dates, collar numbers, signatures that appeared too similar, and brief comments written in cold language that tried to make living creatures sound like misplaced inventory. Not suitable. Released. Relocated. No forwarding details. Caleb had seen paperwork cover grief before. It never did it well. On the wall behind the desk, the collars hung in a quiet row, each one carrying the faint scent of fur, rain, and time. Valor's peg was empty, but below it, a small brass plate remained screwed into the wood. V17. Caleb glanced toward the truck through the rain-streaked window. Valor was sitting upright now, the emergency blanket pulled around his legs, his white face turned toward the office with unwavering focus. He looked less like a rescued animal and more like a witness waiting to be called. Caleb stepped back outside, crossed the muddy yard, and opened the truck door. Warm air rolled out, carrying the smell of wet dog and vinyl seats. "You want to show me something else," Caleb said. Valor answered by lowering his head and pressing his nose against Caleb's sleeve, then turning it toward the office. His legs trembled when he tried to stand. Caleb placed one hand on his shoulder. "Not on those paws, partner." Valor looked at him, tired and stubborn. Caleb almost smiled despite the heaviness in his chest. "That is not a request." He lifted the dog gently, feeling the weight of him shift with trust, and carried him back through the rain into the office. The moment they crossed the threshold, Valor changed. His body, weak moments before, gathered itself around a single purpose. He raised his muzzle, drew in the air, and turned toward the rear hallway. Caleb followed, moving past a supply closet, a small examination room, and a second door with no label. The dog gave one low breath, then nudged Caleb's wrist. The door was not locked. Inside was a narrow records room, windowless, colder than the rest of the building, with metal shelves stacked from floor to ceiling. A portable dehumidifier sat unplugged in the corner. File boxes lined the floor in uneven rows, some marked with adoption dates, others with numbers only. Valor's breathing quickened. Caleb set him carefully on a folded tarp near the doorway, then swept the flashlight across the room. At the far end, beneath a shelf sagging with damp boxes, a plastic storage bin had been pushed behind a stack of old training pads. It was the only bin sealed with duct tape. Caleb knelt, peeled back the tape, and lifted the lid. Inside were dog tags. Not one. Dozens. Some military style. Some engraved pet tags. Some with names worn smooth by years of use. Each was attached to a small card with a number. Caleb did not speak. He felt silence move through him like cold water. Valor lowered his head, eyes fixed on the bin, and made a soft sound that held no anger, only recognition. Caleb picked up the first card. Transferred. No destination. The second. Released. No adopter signature. The third. Held for evaluation. No follow-up. Then he saw another name he knew from the collar wall, and another and another. The dark secret was not a single mistake. It was a system built out of small hidden things, each one quiet enough to ignore until a storm came and washed the cover off. Caleb took photographs, logged the bin's location, then radioed Lieutenant Harris again, his voice low and controlled. I have located additional identification tags and records suggesting multiple K9s were misreported. This property needs to be secured immediately. I need base legal, local animal control, and law enforcement on scene. Tell them to bring transport crates and veterinary support. The line crackled, then Harris answered with no delay. Understood. Backup is 5 minutes out. Caleb looked down at Valor. The dog had lowered his chin to the floor, exhausted now that the hidden room had been found. His eyes remained open, reflecting the flashlight like two small lanterns in the dark. Caleb crouched beside him and rested one hand against the damp white fur of his neck. You did not forget them, he whispered. Valor blinked slowly. Beyond the office walls, tires splashed into the lot. Doors opened. Voices called through the rain, professional, urgent, alive. Help had arrived. But Caleb stayed one moment longer in that narrow records room, with the old tags, the damp boxes, and the white K9 who had carried a forgotten Marine's warning through rising water. He understood then that some rescues are not only about pulling one soul from danger. Sometimes they are about bringing every buried name back into the light, one tag at a time. Backup had arrived in a steady stream of vehicles, headlights cutting through the mist and rain-soaked lot as officers, veterinarians, and support personnel moved quickly and quietly. Caleb guided Valor out from beneath the makeshift cover, keeping him wrapped in the emergency blanket while making sure the dog remained calm amid the sudden influx of activity. Valor, though exhausted, lifted his head slightly, ears twitching, observing each new figure with sharp awareness, amber eyes catching the reflected light from the trucks. Caleb moved slowly alongside him, explaining softly, "They are here to help. You can relax now, buddy." The dog exhaled, a long, steady breath, and allowed Caleb to lead him toward a prepared transport crate where veterinary staff waited with dry towels and blankets. Each movement was careful, deliberate. The dog would not be hurried, and Caleb respected that, feeling the rhythm of Valor's heartbeat beneath his hands as a guide for pace. Officers began securing the documents Caleb had retrieved, stacking the envelopes and tags in waterproof cases while taking photographs for evidence. Valor sniffed at the edges of the crate, his nose lifting slightly to catch the scent of the newcomers, assessing them without any fear, only cautious acknowledgement. Caleb observed, noting that despite the storm, the dog's body language remained protective rather than defensive, alert yet calm, embodying a quiet dignity that spoke of long training and deep loyalty. The veterinary team checked the dog's paws, bandages, and coat, speaking softly in reassuring tones, and Valor responded with a subtle shift, leaning slightly toward the warmth of a blanket and the hand resting lightly on his back. Caleb handed over the dog tag and documents to Lieutenant Harris, making sure each item was accounted for while keeping one eye on Valor. The rain had eased, leaving a thin mist that rose from the asphalt in delicate spirals, and the smell of wet pine and damp earth mingled with the antiseptic of the mobile veterinary unit. Caleb crouched by the transport crate, speaking to Valor in quiet, measured phrases. "You did your part. Every step, every moment, you held the truth until it could be found." Valor lifted his head, amber eyes meeting Caleb's, and then settled back down, letting his body relax fully for the first time in hours, as if acknowledging that the burden he had carried was finally understood. Caleb stood, signaling to the deputies coordinating the area that the dog and evidence were secure, and began walking toward the vehicle assigned for transporting the records and K9 to a safe facility. Each step was careful to avoid slipping on wet boards and shallow puddles, and Valor moved beside him, stepping into the crate only when gently guided, settling on the soft blankets and curling into a restful position. Caleb watched as the team carefully loaded additional crates containing other K9s that had been located and retrieved, all with the same meticulous care, and the weight of the storm's aftermath became tangible in the misty morning air. The quiet hum of engines, the low murmur of officers coordinating, and the soft exhalations of the exhausted dogs created a rhythm that was both calming and solemn. Caleb paused at the rear of the unit, looking at Valor's face resting against the blanket, amber eyes closed now, trusting in the presence of the humans around him, and allowed himself a moment to absorb the scale of the recovery. The hidden records, the overlooked dogs, and the solitary white shepherd that had carried the evidence to him now formed a narrative of resilience, patience, and unwavering loyalty that Caleb would not forget. As the mobile unit pulled onto the road, Caleb stood beside Valor, who stirred slightly with the motion, pressing his nose gently into the folds of the blanket, signaling acknowledgement and quiet relief. The rain had stopped completely, the sky lightening, and the faint warmth of early sunlight touched the edge of the vehicles, reflecting in the wet asphalt and in the golden sheen of Valor's damp fur. Caleb took a deep breath, letting the quiet settle around him, understanding that the day had begun not only with rescue, but with the uncovering of truths long buried, that Valor had been more than a survivor. He had been a messenger, a witness, and a loyal companion guiding the revelation from darkness into light. Every detail, from the wet wood of the kennels to the rusted dog tag, to the careful handling of each record and K9, told the story of hidden neglect, human error, and the quiet heroism of a dog who refused to leave the truth unguarded. Caleb looked down one last time at Valor, now fully settled and calm, and whispered, "You made it. You brought us here." The dog exhaled softly, a contented, steady sound that filled the small cabin of the transport vehicle with a sense of completion and fragile triumph. And Caleb knew that this day would be remembered not only for what had been rescued, but for the integrity and loyalty that had guided every step. The transport vehicle moved slowly down the wet asphalt road, tires hissing through shallow puddles, with Valor curled on a pile of blankets beside the secured crate, his amber eyes half-lidded, occasionally lifting to scan the passing shadows outside the fogged windows. Caleb sat quietly in the passenger seat, glancing at the dog, feeling the rhythm of his breathing as a steadying presence, aware that every mile brought them further from danger, but also deeper into the responsibility of what they had uncovered. The early morning mist clung to the trees and fences lining the roadside, glimmering under the diffuse sunlight breaking through gray clouds, and the faint scent of wet pine mixed with the metallic tang of rain on asphalt. Valor shifted slightly, resting his chin on the folded blankets, muscles relaxing now that he was finally out of the flooded kennel, yet his posture retained a poised alertness as though he had not fully left his duty behind. Caleb's mind cycled through the events of the past hours, the flooded kennel, the rusted dog tag, the hidden records, the small office, and the sealed bin. each detail unfolding like pieces of a puzzle forming a picture he had not anticipated, but now had to manage carefully. He reached down to smooth Valor's fur, brushing aside the damp strands that had clung to his neck, and whispered, "You did more than survive, buddy. You brought the truth to light." The dog exhaled softly, the sound a low, steady affirmation, and pressed his nose lightly against Caleb's knee, a gesture of trust that needed no words. The radio on the dashboard crackled with intermittent updates from the base, coordinating medical staff, legal personnel, and animal control to meet them at the staging area, and Caleb responded with measured precision, ensuring every detail was accounted for while keeping his attention on Valor. The mist began to lift as they approached a small clearing where the support vehicles were lined, lights reflecting in puddles like tiny stars scattered across the asphalt. Officers moved with quiet efficiency, carrying crates, blankets, and medical equipment, speaking in tones low enough not to disturb the calm that Valor had finally claimed. Caleb eased the transport to a stop and opened the side door, letting fresh air mix with the warmth inside the cabin. Valor stepped out carefully, muscles still tense but no longer trembling, and Caleb guided him toward a prepared area under a canopy where the veterinary team had set up drying blankets and assessment stations. The dog's coat glistened with droplets, white fur almost luminous in the filtered sunlight, and his amber eyes reflected the calm of understanding that the moment had shifted from rescue to assessment. Caleb crouched beside him, speaking softly, "You are safe now, Valor. Everything else is just paperwork and process. You did the hard part." Valor rested his head against Caleb's shoulder briefly, then allowed the veterinary team to examine him, ears twitching occasionally but body remaining relaxed as the staff checked his paws, coat, and general condition. Caleb observed quietly, aware that the dog's every movement conveyed both exhaustion and accomplishment, and he noted how the animal seemed to understand that the records and tags they had retrieved were as important as his own survival. The morning light strengthened, casting long, soft shadows across the lot and illuminating the dampness on the vehicles and equipment, turning every droplet into a tiny prism of color. Caleb guided Valor into a more comfortable area with thick towels and blankets, letting him lie down fully, and stepped back to review the assembled documents and photographs, ensuring nothing was misplaced. Each step, each careful glance, reinforced the understanding that this day was not just about pulling a dog from water, but about honoring the duty, loyalty, and persistence that had brought them to the truth hidden beneath years of neglect and oversight. Officers, veterinarians, and legal staff worked in a quiet, coordinated rhythm around them, while Caleb sat near Valor, hand resting lightly on the white fur, feeling the steady pulse beneath. A reminder that some rescues extend far beyond immediate survival, into the realm of exposing what has been hidden and restoring what was lost. Valor exhaled again, a soft, steady sound, and closed his eyes for a brief moment of rest, while Caleb allowed himself to watch, reflect, and prepare for the next steps, understanding fully that loyalty and perseverance had carried not only the dog, but the truth across the storm and into the light of the morning. By late morning, the staging area had settled into a quiet order, the kind that comes after fear has been given a name and placed carefully into folders. The rain clouds had thinned over Jacksonville, North Carolina, leaving the sky washed pale and silver, and sunlight spread across the wet canopy in soft bands. Valor lay beneath it on a thick blanket, his white fur drying in gentle waves, his bandaged paws stretched in front of him, his amber eyes half closed, but never careless. Caleb sat beside him on an overturned supply crate, one hand resting lightly near the dog's shoulder, close enough for Valor to know he was not alone. Around them, officers logged evidence, veterinary staff checked the rescued dogs one by one, and Lieutenant Harris spoke with base legal near the back of a command vehicle. It could have felt busy. It could have felt cold. But somehow every voice had lowered, every step had softened, as if the whole area understood that the truth had arrived tired and breathing. Caleb watched a young veterinary technician carry a sable shepherd from one crate to another, speaking softly as she worked. A tan canine with gray around his muzzle drank water from a stainless steel bowl. Another dog slept under a towel, too exhausted to lift his head, but safe enough not to try. Valor noticed them all. Each time a crate opened, his ears rose. Each time one of the dogs settled, his body eased a little more, as if he had been counting them without sound. Caleb leaned closer. "You were waiting for them too, were you not?" Valor blinked, then looked toward the waterproof cases stacked beside Lieutenant Harris. The records. The tags. The names. A rescue could save a body, but a record could return an identity. Caleb understood that now in a way he had not before. A living creature could be fed, washed, and sheltered, but if its story was stolen, something sacred still remained missing. A white county van pulled into the lot and stopped near the canopy. The driver was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pinned beneath a rain hood and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She introduced herself as Evelyn Whitaker. Caleb felt the name pass through him before he spoke it. Whitaker. Lieutenant Harris walked with her, his expression gentle, his folder held close to his chest. Evelyn did not look at the officers first, or the evidence boxes, or the vehicles. Her eyes found Valor. The dog lifted his head slowly. For the first time since Caleb had pulled him from the floodwater, Valor made a sound that was not duty or pain. It was a soft breath, almost a whine, fragile as paper held too long. Evelyn stopped beneath the canopy, both hands pressed over her mouth. "Oh, Lord," she whispered. "That is him." Caleb stood, giving her space. Valor tried to rise, but his paws trembled. Evelyn knelt before anyone could tell her not to, careful and slow, her knees touching the damp tarp. "Valor," she said, and his tail moved once against the blanket. Just once. But it was enough to make the old woman close her eyes. She reached into her coat pocket and took out a photograph sealed in a plastic sleeve. In it, Staff Sergeant Aaron Whitaker knelt beside a young white German Shepherd on a training field, the same photograph Caleb had found in the records room, only cleaner, brighter, kept by someone who had never stopped remembering. "My son said that dog would come home one day," Evelyn said. Her voice did not break. It bent, like a tree in weather that had survived too many storms. After the paperwork changed, nobody could explain where he went. Aaron kept asking. Then the answers stopped coming. Caleb lowered his eyes to Valor, who had placed his nose against Evelyn's hand with a tenderness that needed no translation. There was no dramatic reunion, no sudden music, no grand speech in the morning air. Only an old mother touching the fur of a dog her son had loved, and a Marine standing nearby with rain still drying on his boots, understanding that justice sometimes begins as a quiet correction of a lie. Lieutenant Harris handed Evelyn the recovered dog tag in a clear sleeve. She stared at it for a long moment, then pressed it gently to her chest. "He kept this?" she asked. Caleb nodded. Above the water. Evelyn looked at Valor, and something like a smile moved through her grief. "Of course he did." The words settled over the canopy like a blessing. Caleb crouched again beside Valor, feeling the dog lean slightly against his leg, not choosing between past and present, but allowing both to exist. The evidence would move forward. The reports would be written. The people responsible for hiding the records would answer through the proper channels. But in that moment, the most important thing was simpler. A name had found its way back to a family. A dog had been seen for who he was. And the secret that once lived in a locked room had begun to lose its darkness in the hands of those willing to carry it carefully into the light. After the initial relief of recognition and the quiet comfort beneath the canopy, Caleb stayed close to Valor, feeling the dog shift slightly beneath the folds of the warm blanket, amber eyes scanning the lot with calm vigilance. Officers moved efficiently around the staging area, transferring other K9s to transport crates, checking tags, and logging details, each step deliberate, precise, yet subdued. As though the presence of Valor and the newly recovered evidence had created a layer of solemnity over the activity. The sun had risen further now, breaking through lingering mist in soft, silver streaks that caught in puddles on the asphalt and made the wet vehicles glisten like polished metal. Caleb crouched beside Valor again, brushing damp fur from the dog's neck and shoulders, and whispered, "You have done more than survive. You delivered the truth." Valor exhaled softly, a low, steady sound, and leaned slightly against Caleb's leg, a small motion that conveyed trust and acknowledgement. Evelyn Whitaker remained nearby, her hands resting lightly on the edge of a crate as she observed Valor with gentle awe, her eyes tracing the contours of the dog's face, seeing the same steadfastness that her son had once cherished. Caleb glanced toward the sealed evidence cases, making sure each was accounted for, and then toward the officers who had begun coordinating the next steps for transporting the records, veterinary support, and K9s to the proper facilities. The mist lifted gradually, and sunlight now warmed the air, mixing with the cool scent of wet pine and asphalt, creating a quiet sense of newness, a morning after a night that had carried both fear and revelation. Valor shifted, resting his head against a folded blanket, amber eyes reflecting the canopy's soft light, scanning every new arrival, every movement, assessing without anxiety, and Caleb understood that, even in rest, the dog was vigilant, observing. Loyal, a sentinel of the truths that had been hidden too long. Caleb allowed himself a breath of relief, letting the gravity of the past hours settle. He thought of the flooded kennel, the rusted dog tag, the hidden office with stacks of damp records, and the quiet diligence with which Valor had led him to the evidence that might have remained buried. The other K9s had been checked, dried, and placed in secure areas with veterinary oversight, but Valor remained the central presence, the guide, the bearer of memory and truth. Caleb spoke softly again. "The hard part is done, but your work has not gone unnoticed." Valor exhaled, a subtle shift of the head, amber eyes lifting briefly toward Caleb's face, conveying understanding without a sound, a language older and steadier than words. Lieutenant Harris approached with a small notepad, nodding toward Caleb. "Everything is logged. Veterinary checks are complete. Legal and base reports are being drafted." Caleb nodded, glancing once more at the dog. "Then our responsibility now is oversight and care. Nothing more, nothing less." The morning light expanded across the lot, softening edges, casting long reflections on puddles, vehicles, and the damp canopy, emphasizing the stillness after the storm's intensity. Caleb remained crouched beside Valor until Evelyn Whitaker stepped forward and extended her hands to the dog, offering calm reassurance. Valor lifted his head, sniffed carefully, then rested his muzzle gently on her hands, a subtle bridge between the past and present. Caleb watched, noting the deep connection, the quiet confirmation that what had been lost was beginning to be restored. Conversations around them were low, professional, but their tone carried the weight of respect, acknowledging Valor's role not merely as a survivor, but as a participant in uncovering a long-hidden truth. Caleb allowed a small, private smile, feeling the gravity of the morning, the significance of every step, every decision, every patient movement, and the trust placed in him by a dog who had carried the responsibility of history on wet paws through a flood and into the light of revelation. Valor exhaled softly again, fully relaxed now, settling against the blanket with an ease that made the sunlit morning feel warmer and more steady. Caleb gently stroked his neck, knowing that the dog had not only survived the storm, but had ensured that no truth remained lost, and that loyalty, patience, and steadfast courage could indeed guide a path from darkness into clarity, from fear into safety, and from secrecy into acknowledgement. The day had unfolded slowly, each moment building toward quiet closure, and Caleb remained beside Valor as the sun climbed higher, casting warm, soft light across the damp asphalt and the rows of crates containing recovered K9s. The mist had vanished, leaving the lot bright and reflective, each puddle glimmering like tiny mirrors of the morning sky. Caleb watched Valor stretch gently on the blankets, amber eyes scanning the lot one last time, alert yet calm, as though acknowledging that the storm had passed, but his duty persisted in memory and vigilance. Evelyn Whitaker remained nearby, carefully observing the dog, her hands folded, her expression a mix of relief and gratitude, as she slowly realized that the animal had not only survived, but had guided the truth into the open. Caleb took in the scene around him, officers logging records and tags into secure cases, veterinary staff examining K9s, and Lieutenant Harris coordinating transport and reports, each moving with a measured precision that matched the gravity of what had been revealed. The white German Shepherd lifted his head occasionally, ears twitching, amber eyes following each movement, ensuring nothing escaped his watchful presence, and Caleb understood that Valor's mission had never been simple survival. He had been a silent witness, a living custodian of facts and proof long hidden from view. The smell of wet pine and asphalt mixed with the faint antiseptic and towels drying in the morning sun, creating a layered scent that spoke of storm, labor, and care. Caleb reached down, running a gloved hand along Valor's neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath his fingers, and whispered softly, "You carried more than yourself, buddy. You carried the story." The dog exhaled, a slow, soft sound that seemed to mark acceptance and relief, then shifted to rest his chin on a folded blanket, amber eyes half closed, but still observant. Caleb glanced toward Evelyn again. She held the dog tag recovered from the flood, pressing it lightly to her chest as if anchoring the past into this present moment. "He remembered," she said quietly. "He did not forget us." Caleb nodded, feeling the truth of that in every line of Valor's posture, in the careful placement of his paws, and in the calm focus of his gaze. Around them, the work continued, but the urgency of danger had dissipated, replaced by the methodical care of recovery and documentation. Caleb assisted as needed, ensuring the K9s were comfortable, hydrated, and safe, yet his attention returned to Valor, who had become the axis around which the understanding of the property's hidden records turned. A gentle breeze stirred, carrying away the last dampness from crates and equipment, and the sunlight reflected off Valor's white coat, highlighting faint traces of mud and rain from the previous night's storm, each mark a testament to perseverance and loyalty. Caleb sat for a moment, letting the stillness settle over him, feeling the significance of the day, of each small act, each careful choice, and each steady breath from the dog beside him. Valor lifted his head again, amber eyes catching the sunlight, and pressed a gentle nose against Caleb's glove, an unspoken affirmation that the work of discovery, rescue, and witness had been fulfilled. Caleb whispered once more, softly, "It is done. You are safe now." The dog exhaled, settling back onto the blankets with a deep, steady breath, and for the first time since the storm, his body relaxed fully, no longer braced against fear or duty, no longer holding evidence in quiet tension. Caleb watched the dog, understanding that some rescues end not with noise or celebration, but with the simple act of allowing trust, integrity, and loyalty to rest. Around them, the recovered K9s lay calmly in their crates. Officers moved methodically through the lot, and sunlight continued to warm the damp surfaces. Evelyn knelt to adjust a blanket over Valor's shoulders, her fingers gentle, her face softening with a quiet smile. Caleb allowed himself a small nod, feeling the weight of responsibility ease, knowing that the records, the evidence, and the dog's careful actions had aligned to restore what had been hidden and to honor what had been lost. Valor's tail thumped lightly once, a subtle sign of contentment, as he closed his eyes fully, amber gaze finally at rest, while Caleb and Evelyn stood together, acknowledging that this day, the storm, the discovery, and the endurance of a single white K9 had created a bridge between truth and care, between the past and present, leaving behind a quiet sense of grace, completion, and profound loyalty that needed no words to be understood.